I have learning disabilities. I've had to deal with them all my life, of course. It all started with a pretty severe head injury I had as a child. Back in the 1960s, they didn't have anything like safety helmets or any emphasis on child safety. It was just, maybe I was one of the guinea pigs that started all the attention on getting child safety seats in cars, child safety helmets, etc. But what happened to me was, I think I was probably around 4 or 5 years old, and I was trying to ride a bicycle because I saw all the older kids in the neighborhood riding bicycles and I wanted to ride one. And before anybody could catch me, I had grabbed my older sister's bicycle and tried to get on it and ride with the other kids, which turned out to be catastrophic and disastrous. It was so bad that I don't even remember what happened. To this day, I don't remember what happened. In fact, it wiped out my memory from that moment backwards. In other words, I don't remember anything from birth to that point in my life. I have bits and pieces that come flash into my memory once in a while, but most of it is gone. I was completely knocked out. What happened was, I got on my sister's bike and I was trying to ride it and keep up with some kids, and I crashed into the curb and my head slammed into the curb really bad. So bad that it knocked me out, completely out. Back then, they didn't even take me to a hospital or a doctor or anything. All they did was pick me up, take me into the house, put me in their bed, and waited for me to wake up. That's all that was done. I woke up several hours later not knowing why I was waking up in my parents' bed, what had happened, what day it was. The reason why I'm telling you this is because it's my conspiracy theory on my learning disabilities. I'm dyslexic. I made poor grades in school. I have ADHD. A little bit of OCD. I have just struggled throughout my life to learn at anything. I remember being in school, I could not learn the way the other students could. I would have to go home each day and be humiliated by Dad. He would get off work and he would make me sit with him for an hour at least. Multiplication tables. He had a deck of flashcards that had the multiplication tables on them, and he would flash them at me and say, what is 12 times 12? What is 3 times 4? What is 9 times 6? While all the other kids were out playing, and what made it worse was I could hear them out there playing while I was sitting there staring at math. I struggled all through school. When I got to junior high, threatened with being bused across town to another school that my parents didn't want me going to, and I didn't want to go to. So they didn't want to have to drive all the way across town to pick me up and things like that. They spent a buttload of money on me, which made me feel guilty, but they spent their hard-earned money to get me into a private school, which a friend of mine was going to at the time. They had an entrance exam you had to take to get into that school. I flunked it, of course, and my parents had to beg the administrator of the school to give me another shot at it. I remember what happened was, one of the instructors from that school that was in charge of admissions, before I took the second test, he took me into an office, went over what the test was going to be on. He would explain questions to me verbally. When he got through, I took the test and I passed the second time. But I was so embarrassed. And that's one thing that parents, if you have a child that's got learning disabilities, just know that they are embarrassed about it, and they hold a lot of things inside themselves and won't talk about it. just know that your child is hurting. What made matters worse for me when I was growing up, my older sister made straight A's. She made straight A's all her life, all the way through grade school, junior high, high school, and college. She made straight A's. She was an achiever. She knew how to study. She was a cheerleader. She was just perfect as far as accomplishing things go. I couldn't help but feel like my parents would have that comparison between me and her. I was the total opposite. I was making C's and D's, struggling to get by, and I would barely make it. And at some point, I think when I transferred back to the public schools from the private school, I almost feel like the public school system just passed me through. I was making the same C's and D's regardless of what school I was going to. I feel like sometimes they just passed me through to get me through. And when I graduated high school, I was bewildered. I didn't have any idea of what I was going to do. There was always military. A lot of the older kids that I remember went into the military. Some of them flunked out of the military, and I thought to myself, I probably will too. I'll probably flunk out. I probably won't make it. I don't even think I could pass the physical part of it, much less the mathematics and everything. I had already been working through school in high school, so I just thought, well, I'll just go to work, and that's what I did. But then when I got out in the working world, I always felt like I was a fraud. I couldn't keep a job. I was always getting laid off, fired. I just wouldn't ever give up. I hung in there. 50 years later, after working it felt to me like slavery because I did not ever find my calling. Couldn't ever find what I really was on fire to do. So that's what your child may face if they have learning disabilities. I struggle today with staying organized. I have trouble staying organized, especially with my computer and video files. I have struggles focusing for any length of time. There's the ADHD part of it. I have always had a problem remembering people's names forever. And as time goes by, it just seems like it's getting worse. You know, I'll meet somebody that I'm excited to meet. I like meeting different people, and they'll tell me their name and I'll tell them mine. It just seems like sometimes, in some instances, right after they tell me their name, I can't remember their name. It's ridiculous. I have trouble paying attention for any length of time. If I'm not really passionate and interested about the subject matter that the person is talking about, they'll lose me after just a few minutes. I'll start daydreaming. I'll just start, my mind will just wander off. One thing, parents and adults, if you're an adult and you have learning disabilities, I found one thing that did help me as far as school went. I asked my English professor if she would be okay with me recording her class, because at the time, right after class, I think I was a sophomore, right after class, I had to go to my job because I was working my way through school. I never got a student loan or anything like that. I was always working. I paid for everything myself. That's a subject for another video, but anyway, I was always working and I had limited time to study, so I explained that to her and she was gracious enough to let me record her class. So I would take a little cassette recorder. I had a cassette tape recorder that was handheld, and what I did was I sat right in front of her in class and I put the cassette recorder under my chair and just left it running. What I used to do was I would have to leave the college campus and drive 30, sometimes 45 minutes to get to work. And I would just put that cassette tape of her class into my tape player in the car, and I would listen to her as I drove to my job. I did that 3 times a week, so I had to go Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to class. I did that 3 times a week, and I would put that tape in the car and just keep listening to her over and over. What I found doing that I didn't study that hard in that class. I just kept listening to those tapes. And I ended up with an A in the class. And that had never happened to me before in my life. I had never made A's. I made a few B's, but I was just a C student most of my life until that happened. And then a light bulb went off. I thought, well, maybe I learn not by reading, but by auditory. So I began to use that technique whenever I could. I kept asking my professors if they would allow me. Most of them would let me do it. Some of them didn't like it and wouldn't allow it, but some of them would let me do it. So in today's technology, though, I just saw on YouTube the other day, they have this little capsule thing that fits on your wrist like a wristwatch, or you can wear it on your shirt pocket. It records everything, and then you can take your USB cable and plug it into whatever you use. And so if I was a student today, that's what I would be doing. I would be recording my classes. Children and adults who have learning disabilities, dyslexia, dyscalculia, any kind of learning problems, you need to attack it and try every method you can think of to find something that works. And that's what worked with me finally. But that's what I've been through. And if you've got children that are going through that, just know that they are frustrated. They are embarrassed. They are feeling like they're a loser when they're not. You're not a loser. You just learn different from the rest of the people. It's no shame on you. It's just it happens. Now, I've heard some doctors say that some of it is hereditary. That could be true too in my case. The head injury after that, I had several concussions before I was even out of grade school. I was always getting in fights, accidents, and that's another thing. When your child is perceived as dumb, they're going to get bullied. They're going to get bullied all through school. They're going to get bullied when they're an adult. It never stops. The bullying will never stop. And it's because people perceive you as someone they can take advantage of. I used to have to argue with kids and people on my jobs even sometimes. I would snap back at them and tell them, look, I'm slow. I'm not stupid. I'm just slow. I need to go over things and over them 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 more than other people do. So my big takeaway out of all this is you're not dumb. You just learn differently. And you have to figure out what works best for your child, what works best for you. If you don't find it, just keep trying different methods until you do. You'll make it. Just don't give up. That's one of the things I look back on in my school and my working life that helped me was I had this tenacious kind of attitude. I was not going to give up. I hung in there, even though my grades were bad, even though I got fired from jobs, even though people perceived me as a dum-dum. I just wouldn't give up. And I don't want you to give up either. Giving up is not an option. Not on my watch.